Welcome to the Illuminating Primary Care podcast.
Hi, welcome to the Illuminating Primary Care podcast. My name is Victoria Ashton. I head up the Practice Managers, Healthcare Managers recruitment desk here at Menlo Park. I'm joined today by Tracy Dell, who is a very experienced practice manager. Tracy agreed to join us further to my previous podcast with her friend and colleague, Julie Dixon, who is an interim practice manager and a trainer in the North East. So Tracy is actually an interim practice manager, trainer. She does coaching and marketing, practice business manager in West Yorkshire. Having worked at management level within primary care since 2003, Tracy has seen how much the role of a practice manager has changed over the years. So, Tracy, big warm welcome.
Hi.
Thank you. 21 years is an impressive period of time to manage practices, and I imagine that during that time you've been witness to many changes. What would you say are the most significant changes, and how have these changes impacted both the practice and its staff, and specifically the practice managers?
Yeah, 21 years. I only recognise that because it pops up on the LinkedIn profile and reminds you of it. So yeah, 3rd of July 2003, I joined general practice as a practice manager. I think over the time, and it's given me a great opportunity to see that over that 21 years, the massive differences. And it's great that I've grown with that as well. So I've been really lucky to be able to do that. I think I've come to the conclusion over this period of time, one thing that's really stuck in my mind, to be honest, Victoria, is that regardless of the size of practice, it's become a job that's too big for one person anymore. And that's not to say that we need two practice managers in every surgery, regardless of the size. That's not what I'm sort of advocating. But I do think the role has changed in that we've started working in partnership and more collaboratively in the practices at that level now. So we've taken, other practice members and given them sort of lead responsibilities. And we've done the same with the partners in the practice as well. So we've worked much closer as a team as opposed to individually. A lot fell on the practice manager's shoulders in the early days. And I think we're starting to see a difference now over that time, with partners taking more responsibility around things like finance and HR, and obviously having, lead roles in reception and admin and nursing as well, and in the clinical teams. So, and I think I came into practice all those years ago from the outside, if you like, from, not working in general practice, but working in healthcare, in admin and management roles. So I was one of those outsiders, but I think now we're seeing much more diverse sort of backgrounds of people coming into practice management, which I personally think is a really great thing. So military, from banking and from retail, bringing all those management skills and qualities into primary care and learning about how that fits in a primary care sort of environment. And I think that's a really positive thing. So those are my kind of initial observations of what's changed in that period. I mean, obviously we could spend hours and hours talking about everything else, but those are the two sort of main areas that I've seen change massively over that time.
I've seen a lot of CVs with people with, like you say, a really a diverse background, but with lots of transferable skills. But obviously, primary care is special beast of it all on its own. So although it's great to have these transferable skills coming in, and there's a lot they can bring to a practice, I do think people sometimes underestimate exactly what is expected of a practice manager. Obviously, an important element of being a practice manager running a successful business is increasing profit and reducing expenses. To be financially astute is significantly important to ensure the smooth, successful running of a practice. It is a business after all, at the end of the day. Ways to bring money into the practice are important, as well as managing what the practice spends. So, in your experience, have you ever been witness to differences between the practice manager and the partners potentially causing conflict? I understand partners want to pay themselves well, and why not? They work very hard. However, is this ever at the expense of the practice, and consequently could then make the role of the practice manager even more challenging?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think let's be honest, we are running businesses, small businesses that are commissioned to deliver NHS services. And obviously, the public don't really see that side of it. Um, Obviously, we're the manager of that. So we're the ones that are at the centre of kind of coordinating all of that activity. And it's our responsibility to drive profit and decrease expenses, but not at the extent of the quality of service delivery, and certainly not at the expense of cutting any corners with staffing and things like that. And I get staffing is the easiest one to look at because it's one of our most expensive resources in the practice. It's where most of the money goes from our income, of course, but it's also the most valuable resource you've got. So if you can get the workforce right, and that's half the battle, I think, in practice. It's really difficult because unless you're a managing partner, you're actually in conflict with being a salaried member of the team yourself. And it's a really difficult situation to be in as a manager, and also be maybe trying to drive a pay rise, for example, because you're going to benefit from that individually unless you are a partner or unless you're a locum or a consultant like I am, when you've got that kind of objectivity. I think sometimes partners are driven by money, and I've worked in different practices and I've supported different practices with different types of culture. Not everybody wants to kind of invest the way they should do in their workforce and in their premises and lots of other things. It's really difficult because there's a fine line between, you've got to remember the difference between being a partner and being salaried as a GP, for example, is a lot of extra hard work. Therefore, they want extra benefit to come back financially to them for that. And I get that. I totally get that their drawings have to be maximised because they work really hard over and above. They don't just see the patients, they run a business as well in conjunction with the practice manager. So I've seen wide variation across the country, some really good examples, but I've also seen quite poor examples as well, which is, it's quite sad for me. Lack of investment in staffing, for example, is a really difficult one, and one that I grapple with, and that's one of my strongest values, that we have to invest in our teams. And the fact that we've got quality indicators now to tackle and actually really truly focus on well-being, and the well-being of our workforce. I mean, we shouldn't need a well-being indicator and financial reward to do that. We should be doing that anyway. But there's lots and lots of different issues around different sort of levels of pay for different practice staff across the country. And that's because we're all configured differently. We all deliver the same contracts and work on the same contracts, but we do that in different ways because of our populations and because of our workforce. So we might have dual roles. We might have some receptionists might process administration. Some practices might have the admin and reception team as one team, and they all do everything together. So it's really difficult it's like comparing apples with pears, isn't it, sometimes? So there are sometimes difficulties, and it is a very awkward conversation to be had. But I've just put my business hat on when I'm having these conversations. So it's not Tracy talking, it's the business manager or it's the practice manager. And we talk about the greater good for the benefit of our patients initially, and then the greater good of our financial viability, really, our survival and our sustainability. And financially, we have to make tough decisions. And more so with the change in, the increased living wage and lots of other pressure that's put on practices. It can be really, really difficult. But I think we've got to have those difficult conversations. But the only way to get through it is to work together.
Obviously, things are starting to evolve within the world of practice management. I used to work with GPs for many years, and I witnessed many a portfolio career because GPs were getting burnt out and they wanted to keep the week more interesting. And I can see more and more practice managers are starting to do that, probably on account of what not wanting to burn out and wanting to keep the week interesting. Because the practice managers I speak to generally, they do love their job, they still want to do it, but they want to also explore other avenues, which is something that you have done yourself. So let's talk about the rise of the portfolio career. What is it that you're doing now, Tracy, and how does your week look, and why did you decide to go down that road?
Yeah, I think after about 18 years of being in one practice, I'd always been extremely lucky in the last few years in my practice before I actually left. the practice. I'd always been lucky that my practice were quite happy to free me up, if you like, with relevant backfill to be able to work with people like the Primary Care Trust, as was then the clinical commissioning groups, now the ICBs, the Integrated Care Boards, working with the local medical committee, GP federations, and the PCN to do project work. So whilst it was outside of my practice, it was bringing huge benefits back into the practice, and obviously developing me as a manager as well, and making me more confident, more knowledgeable, more experienced in other areas of, say, for example, commissioning. And I did an awful lot of work with the local medical committee around practice management development as well, and the framework for that, that changing role of the practice manager. So I was always given lots of opportunities to work with supporting organisations in primary care. And I think once I started to do that, and the practice saw the benefit that brought to me individually, but as well, it brought that to the practice. We were often, volunteering and piloting different programs, for example. And then I decided that, I didn't want to sort of end my career being in the same role. I mean, I loved my job. I loved the practice. I still have, great affection for my practice, even after I've left all these years later. And I still love my job, but I just do things a little bit differently now. I've retained a little bit more balance. So I worked out what brought me joy. I might be a bit weird, but I love HR, and I love the complex HR that brings, those challenges to practices. I'm not HR specialist. I know when to draw the line and get specialist help, but I've dealt with so many different situations that I've become really experienced in a very practical approach to resolving difficulties, initially through communication. So I kind of found what I really liked doing, and I found what brought me joy. And then I also like supporting and developing staff as well. So I do an awful lot of work supporting new managers in practice at the moment as a consultant. And I do some training. Never imagined myself as a trainer. I still don't see myself as a trainer, if I'm honest, Victoria. But I go out and I talk about things that I know about and things that have worked really well in different practices, because this isn't about it working well in one practice. It's about trying this out in different practices across different parts of the country as well. And so to be able to get a balance of being in practice for a few days a week and still doing the job that I love and I live and breathe all the time, I think I stay live by being in practice. And then I still think that doing other work outside of the practice brings me that joy that I have. And I've got a lot more flexibility with time off and, work and home life balance. And I've always thought, if clinicians can have portfolio careers, why can't we as managers as well? And why is it seen as, as detriment to the practice? It should be a benefit, because it brings so much to the practice. My experience of what goes on outside of the practice has helped me to work better in my role in practice as well. So you bring all that skill back in and all that knowledge and experience. And I think it's really hard because, you've got to balance it then. So I've got to remember what hat I've got on sometimes, and that can be difficult. But once you get that right, I mean, we're always really good at organising things, I think, as practice managers. So that's a skill that's kind of inbuilt. So I've managed to do that, and I've managed to get that organisation and priority right, so that that the practice doesn't lose out. And I think that's the biggest fear of letting practice managers go outside of practice. What are we going to lose? Well, let's think about what you're going to gain from that. And I think that's the best way to look at it.
So we've talked about how much the role of the practice manager has changed in your time. How do you imagine, or how do you envisage the future for practice management? What do you think that might look like?
Probably going to be a bit controversial here, Victoria, by starting to say that there is a life cycle for a practice manager. I think it's a very intense job. I think it's really challenging. I think it's really stressful. And I think when we don't get the balance right, that's when we experience burnout. We're seeing so much burnout in practice. I do admin for one of the practice manager Facebook groups, for example, and I see lots and lots of comments on there about how people are feeling and how the job is too much and there's too much pressure. So I do believe that, I mean, I've done this job for 21 years and I've had to get the balance back within the last few years, because I knew that I couldn't keep going with, we're pushing our retirement day even further forward. Mine's 67 and a half. I knew I would not be able to do this job full time at the pace I was working by the end of that period of time. I knew something had to give, and I had to get the balance with still doing the job that I loved, but not actually moving on and doing a completely different career, for example, because I know that that's not an option for everybody. And I think it's a shame that with a little bit of support and recognition of that, that potential to burn out before it actually happens. And it's not that difficult to spot. We can read each other. I think strong supervision and support for practice managers is missing. I think the people that are lucky to have a mentor or have some support, I mean, we get support from our network of managers. But I think I see practice management of the future being a very different thing. I see it being a role that's not just one person doing everything. I see it being much more collaborative. At scale working is already here. I don't think it's going away, but let's get the benefit of the at scale areas. We don't have to release and let go of all of our role as a practice manager and break it down so that it's unrecognizable, but we can share workload across a PCN or across a collaborative of practices, or a larger practice can share that role and split that role. So we can specialize in finance or HR or procurement or estates management or patient services development or IT. We can do that. And I think we will start to see practice managers with special interests developing a little bit more than it has already. And we've just had a change of government. It's really topical right now. We don't know what's going to happen in that future. We don't know what the plans are. They can promise things, but let's see them deliver things. But I definitely think that we need a profession. We need to be recognised as a profession, and real accreditation should be able to sort of determine that, really. So let's see what Amanda Pritchard plans to do with the accreditation pathway for NHS managers, including GP practice. That'll be very interesting.
I must admit, I'm intrigued to see what's going to happen over the next few months under our new Labour government. Yeah, time will tell. We'll be having another podcast before you know it to discuss those changes, no doubt.
Yeah.
Tracy, thank you so much for taking the time today to have a conversation with me about the modern day practice manager and how things have changed over the years. I really appreciate it. It's always a delight to talk to you. And hopefully we will have another podcast soon, like I said, to discuss what changes the Labour government has brought in. But hopefully, if they do, let's hope that it's a positive change. But yeah, thanks once again, Tracy, and I will bid you farewell. All the best.
Thank you very much, Victoria. Thanks for having me. I look forward to the rest of the series.
Pleasure. Take care.
Bye.